I will read this when my bathtub fills up. Alright. It's finding our way home. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself, and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. Tell me about a moment of real solitude, a moment when you were with yourself and felt yourself at the center, a moment when you could feel the world, the stars, the galaxies spinning around you. In spring of 1974, I took a train home at the end of my college term. There was one train a day that left Toronto, and in the early evening it arrived in my hometown, 400 miles north at 4:30 in the morning. No one knew I was coming, so there was no one there to meet me at the station, the only person to get off the train. I stood for a moment on the wooden platform and then swung my knapsack onto my back and started to walk toward home. My family lived on the opposite side of town, about a mile and a half away. It was dark when I started walking, but by the time I'd reached the bridge that spanned the river in the center of town, walking past stores and restaurants and the town's single traffic light, dutifully changing color, although there was not a car in sight, the sky was streaked with pink gold of dawn, and the birds were singing the sun up. It's the quiet I remember most, the sweet stillness of the whole town sleeping. I was 19, in blue jeans, denim jacket, and a yellow t-shirt, with long, straight blonde hair. I inhaled a great gulp of the cool spring air and found myself smiling for no apparent reason. I suddenly realized that no one knew where I was, and yet I was there, close to so many who knew me, walking down the center of the deserted streets. Past the familiar houses, I felt invisible. Seeing and yet not being seen, by choice. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone and completely with myself. I imagined the people I knew in those houses, sleeping, dreaming, waking to the growing light and rolling over to find one more hour of sleep, unaware that someone was walking past, observing their live motions. I paused for a long time and watched the river endlessly, muddy with the brown-red soil of the surrounding clay belt. The water flowed into the lake in an infinite stream, whether I or anyone else was there to see it or not. Just as the town and the life I had known growing up continued, whether I was miles away in the city or here, silently walking on. I passed the house as a light was turned on and a woman wrapped in her bathrobe moved past the kitchen window to fill a kettle and put it on the stove as she did every morning at the same time. It was as if I stepped outside something of which I had always unconsciously been a part and was seeing it for the first time. The stream of life, the cycle of ordinary living that goes on within and around us all the time. I knew that in a moment when I went through my parents' door, I would become part of it again and lose this acute sense of being the witness, alone and completely with myself and my own thoughts. I knew I would be swept up in the hugs and explanations of surprise and greeting, the sharing of news and the sounds and smells of bacon and eggs and coffee, the irresistible tide of living in the world. But for this moment, I was with the world, watching it, but somehow not in it. I was alone with myself. I paused on the patio outside the back door, prolonging the moment. I was alone, lost to everyone, and yet not lost, but here, on the doorstep. I knew that home was as much in the slow walk alone through the quiet streets as it was the arrival at the store. Home was in the taste of being with myself, walking next to what was familiar towards what was cherished. Then I opened the door and crossed the threshold with the conscious deliberation and called out, "Is there anyone up here yet?" As my mother came into the kitchen, I glanced back outside, and in my mind's eye, I saw the other young woman standing there, backpack on, watching us, grinning at me. I knew I would get back to her. I had met myself walking home in the dawn, and I liked the company I'd kept in those empty moments. Tell me, have you met yourself? Have you been able to step outside the business of life for just one moment and look in from the outside, feeling yourself whole and separate, and yet with the world? There's a tension in living fully what often feels like an opposition between our longing for solitude, where we can find our own company, and the desire to be fully and intimately with the world. When we learn to live with both desire for separation and the longing for union, we find that we are simply two ways of knowing the same ache. We all just want to go home. Some days solitude is an impossibility caught up in the activities of daily living. I ache for my own company and am filled with sorrow that makes me weep when I cannot find it. And at other times I do too much and run too fast deliberately, unconsciously hoping to avoid the cool and steady gaze of that young woman standing on the patio, the gaze that sees clearly what is within and around me. Sometimes I don't like what she sees. I don't like the company I keep when I'm with myself, and I want to pull away from this woman I am. So I fill the empty moments with TV or work or a book or time with another. It takes courage to be willing to meet myself over and over again, seeing in my own face more beauty and grace and ability to love than I'd hoped for, more judgment and impatience and need than I had feared. I forget that it does not matter how far or how fast I move, but only how much of myself I take along for the journey. Fortunately, the illness that found me early in my adult life makes it possible for me to move too far away from myself for too long. What was endured as a curse is now my blessing. If I do not find a way to regularly create a place in my life for a time that is empty, when nothing is scheduled or expected or reached for, so I can be with myself, my glands swell, give an impeding descent into illness and calling me back to stillness. And sometimes when I find that sweet solitude, I hear warnings about isolation. Some summers when I was alone in the wilderness, content in my tiny trailer at the edge of the lake, I would not speak to or see another human being for weeks. There I could slow it all down. I felt the power of life being lived around and within me. I became like a sun-warm rock in the center of the stream, and the water parted around me, eddied in spirals, and flowered on, gently wearing away all my sharp edges. Once a man who was a lover, who was my lover and a friend, and wanted to be more, came to see me unexpectedly. I had just split an armload of wood and was carrying it into the trailer as he appeared. He stayed only briefly. Later he told me, when I came down the driveway and saw you standing there with the wood in your arms, your face glowing from the wind off the lake and the effort of chopping wood, I thought, she belongs to this place. She's at home here. Alone in the bush. She's not missing me and doesn't need me here. I felt like an intruder. His observation surprised me. I heard the voice of my mother warning, you are too independent. Don't get too good at being alone or you'll end up by yourself. Everyone needs someone. Her fear finds a small corner in me, but I resist the idea that I'll be with another only to avoid being alone. Surely the ability to truly be with myself does not exclude the willingness to be fully with another. I do not seek isolation. The longing for another remains even when I am able to be with myself, although it's smaller, a whisper that tugs at me gently. Even there in my place of solitude, in the wilderness, I found myself at moments wanting to turn to someone and share my awe at the brilliance of the full moon on the still water, and the delight of watching the otters play at the edge of the stream. But the loneliness was bittersweet and bearable because I knew myself and the world in a way I sometimes do not when I let my life become too full of doing things that do not really need to be done. Once in a while, trying to find the end of the thread of what wants to be written, I will do a writing exercise that involves finishing the statement I don't want to write about. Over the years, the statement is most often completed this way: I don't want to write about loneliness. For years, I thought the loneliness, the longing for the other was a weakness, a sign that I had not learned how to be with myself. And there have indeed been times when I have wanted to be with someone simply to cover the ache of not being able to find my own company. But I've come to accept that no matter how much I'm able to be with myself, no matter how much I like my own company, I still long to sit close to and at times to merge completely with another in deep intimacy. This too is coming home. The completeness of self is found when we can be alone and when we can bring all of who we are to another, receiving and being fully received. This is a sacred marriage, the coming together of two who have Each met themselves on the road. When two who have this intimacy with themselves and are fully with each other, whether for a lifetime or for a moment, the world is held tenderly and fed by the image they create simply by being together. We can be friends or family or lovers or life partners or simply two strangers whose life intersect for a moment. They may be telling each other stories or making love or sharing a task or sitting in silence together. It doesn't matter. If having met myself in the empty moments, I'm willing and able to bring all of who I am to another, receiving all of who they are, then we are truly together. In that moment, in the image of our being together creates, we are the manifestation of life holding, creating and feeding life. This is the fullness of the homecoming for which we all long. These moments, these sacred marriages of two, bring each person back to themselves more fully. When I was younger, this excitement of proximity and the heat of passion combined with the uneasiness with myself often meant that I lost myself when I was with another. Let me go turn off this bathtub. When I was with someone who caught my imagination, with possibilities beyond friendship, I found it hard to know what I wanted. I was aware only of his wanting me and was drawn by his desire. Now that I'm more able to be with myself, I seek those I can be completely without losing myself. And when I listen and follow the quiet but deep impulse to move towards someone, moving away as quickly as I can while staying connected to this impulse, I found a sweet ease in my body and an infinite tenderness in my heart. And I recognize that I've longed for in the nameless ache that has been with me so many years. The tension eases between my desire for personal freedom and independence and my desire for solitude of my own company and my longing for deep commitment and intimacy with others. I find in our time together more of myself, and I find in my time alone more of the world. Tell me, how do you live with yourself and those around you? Are you willing to meet yourself and not turn away from what you see? Can you touch skin to skin when we meet? With just a word, a gesture, a moment of shared silence? Can you find your way home again and again to the place where all the longing is met? In the moments when we have come home to ourselves and the world, there is no fear because we know what we belong to and what belongs to us. When I was a teenager, I would walk home from choir practice in the evening alone through the darkness, and I was not afraid. In the deep stillness of winter, with temperatures often colder than 20 below zero, I walked down silent streets between high banks of snow sparkling blue, white, in the flickering glow of the northern lights. My breath hung in the air, small silver clouds of frozen moisture that came from my body. I was not afraid. I knew I belonged to the cold, dark sky and dancing lights. I knew I belonged to the people in the houses I passed, those I knew and those I did not. I knew I belonged to the snow-laden evergreens that bowed over the road. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the frozen ground and the soft, steady rhythm of my breath, and these belonged to me. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you'll risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide or fade or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, If you can dance in the wilderness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful or realistic and to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you're telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. If you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it's not pretty, every day, and if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand on the edge of the lake and shout to the silver full moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. And that was the end of the invitation. Thanks for coming.